February 1945. A frozen train platform in New Hampshire. American soldiers rushed forward with warm blankets and hot coffee. The shivering German women screamed and threw them back into the snow. "Let us die in the cold," they shrieked. "We want nothing from you." These women had been told the Americans would torture them, strip them naked, photograph them, use them as slaves. They were so terrified of mercy that they chose freezing to death instead. Then one young soldier did something nobody expected. He took off his winter coat in 14-degree weather, sat down in the snow, and refused to move. What he said next broke them completely. Not with cruelty, with 6 words that shattered everything Nazi propaganda had taught them. What happened over the next 6 months would haunt these women for the rest of their lives, because the truth they discovered was more devastating than any punishment could ever be. This is not a story you have heard before. And if you appreciate true World War II stories that challenge everything you thought you knew, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Your support keeps these forgotten stories alive. Stay with me. Because what the Americans did to these prisoners was something no one saw coming, not even the prisoners themselves. The cattle cars smelled like fear. 127 German women pressed together in wooden boxes built for animals. The train had left the port of Boston 2 days ago. Now it crawled north through a frozen landscape none of them recognized. Greta Mler was 23 years old. She pushed her face against a crack in the wooden wall. Outside, snow fell in thick sheets. Wind screamed across empty fields. The world was white and brutal and strange. Her fingers had turned blue at the tips. Her breath came out in clouds that froze on her scarf. Behind her, bodies packed so tight that some women could not sit down. "What do you see?" whispered Maria, a girl from Berlin. "Snow," Greta said. "Trees. Guard towers. Guard towers." The words spread through the car like poison. That meant the camp was close. That meant whatever came next would begin soon. These women wore the grey-green uniforms of the Wehrmacht Women's Auxiliary Corps, the Helferinnen. They had been Hitler's secretaries, radio operators, nurses, and factory workers. Now they were prisoners of a nation they had been taught to hate. For 2 weeks since their capture in the ruins of Hamburg, they had heard stories. The Americans were not men. They were monsters. They would strip the women naked and photograph them. They would force them into brothels for soldiers. They would torture them for information, then throw their bodies in ditches. An SS officer had grabbed Greta's arm during the chaos of surrender. Blood dripped from a wound on his head. His eyes were wild. "They will do to you what the Russians did in the East," he whispered. "But worse. The Americans smile while they destroy you." Greta believed him. Why would she not? The Reich had told her the truth about everything else. The Reich had promised victory. The Reich had promised glory. The Reich had promised that Germany would rule the world. Now Germany was rubble, and Greta was cargo. The train screeched to a halt. Metal screamed against frozen rails. Women gasped and grabbed each other in the darkness. Then the door slid open. Light and cold rushed in together. After hours of darkness, the brightness felt like a blade. Women screamed. Some tried to push backward, but there was nowhere to go. American voices shouted in harsh, foreign sounds. "Out. Everyone out. Move." Greta was shoved forward. Her boots hit frozen ground. The cold bit through worn leather. Her soles had holes. She had been walking in wet boots for 3 weeks. Around her, women stumbled from the train. They blinked against the snow, their arms wrapped around thin bodies. Some carried small bags. Others had nothing at all. The temperature sat at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. The women wore uniforms designed for German summers, not New Hampshire winters. Greta looked up at the camp. Barbed wire fences, guard towers with searchlights, rows of wooden barracks painted dark green. It looked like something from a nightmare made orderly. American soldiers stood in formation. Their rifles hung casually over their shoulders. Their breath fogged in the frozen air. They wore thick winter coats, heavy gloves, wool caps. But Greta noticed something strange. The soldiers were not shouting. They were not laughing. They were not looking at the women with hunger or hatred. One young soldier, barely older than 20, stared at the women with an expression Greta could not read. Was it pity? Disgust? She could not tell. Not knowing terrified her more than hate would have. Form a line. An American officer shouted. His voice was sharp, but not cruel. Single file. We'll process you one at a time. Process. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Greta remembered the SS officer's warning. This is where it begins, she thought. The humiliation. The degradation. The end. She clenched her jaw and prepared for the worst. But then something happened that made no sense. 3 American soldiers approached carrying large grey bundles. Blankets. Thick, military-issue wool blankets. They moved down the line, offering one to each woman. Here, a soldier said to Greta. He held out a folded blanket. "You're freezing." Greta stared at it. This was a trick. It had to be. They would give the blankets and then take them away, or the blankets were poisoned, or this was a test to see who was weak enough to accept American charity. "No," Greta said. Her voice came out as a croak. The soldier blinked. "What?" "No," Greta repeated, louder. "We do not want your blankets." Behind her, Maria's voice rose, shrill with fear. "Let us die in the cold. We would rather freeze than accept anything from you." The cry spread down the line. Other women began shouting, their voices cracking. "Let us die. We want nothing from you. Do what you will, but we will not take your poisoned charity." One woman grabbed a blanket from her shoulders and threw it to the ground. Then another. Then another. Grey wool landed in the snow like fallen flags. The American soldiers stood frozen, shock on their faces, confusion, and something else. Hurt. The women had expected monsters. Instead, they found men who looked wounded by their refusal. But one soldier was about to do something that would change everything. Private James Sullivan watched the blankets fall into the snow. He was 21 years old, a Catholic boy from South Boston, the son of Irish immigrants who had fled poverty and oppression. His mother had taught him simple rules. You help people when they need it. You feed the hungry. You clothe the naked. You shelter the homeless. It did not matter if they were friend or enemy. It only mattered that they were human. Sullivan had landed on Omaha Beach 8 months earlier. He had fought through France and into Germany. He had seen men die in ways that would wake him screaming for decades. He had killed men whose faces he would never forget, and he had walked through Buchenwald. The concentration camp had broken something inside him. Piles of bodies stacked like firewood. Survivors who looked like skeletons wrapped in skin. The smell of death so thick it coated your tongue. Of the approximately 280,000 prisoners who passed through Buchenwald, over 56,000 died there. Sullivan had seen what humans could do to other humans when hatred was given power, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Watching women freeze rather than accept help. They stood in the snow, shivering so hard their teeth rattled. Their lips had turned blue. Their fingers were white with frostbite, and they would rather die than take a blanket from an American soldier, because someone had told them Americans were monsters. Sullivan felt something crack inside his chest. The war had already taken his friends. It had taken his innocence. It had taken his belief that the world made sense. He would not let it take these women too. The other soldiers looked at their sergeant. They waited for orders. But Sullivan did not wait. He unbuttoned his heavy winter coat. Slowly, deliberately. The women watched him with wide, terrified eyes. This was it, they thought. This was where the violence began. This was where the American monster revealed himself. Sullivan pulled off his coat. Underneath, he wore only his uniform shirt and undershirt. The cold hit him immediately. 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind cutting through thin fabric like it was not there. Then he walked to the nearest woman. She was older, maybe 45. Her lips had gone from blue to purple. Her whole body shook. Sullivan draped his coat over her shoulders. The woman screamed. She threw the coat off like it was on fire. It landed in the snow between them. Sullivan picked it up, brushed off the snow, tried again. Again, she threw it down. This time, she spat at his feet. "Please," Sullivan said quietly, "you'll die out here. Then we die." The woman shrieked in broken English. "Better to die than accept your lies." Sullivan stood there in the falling snow, his coat in his hands, his body already beginning to shake from the cold. Then he did something no one expected. He sat down, right there in the snow, cross-legged, like a child at a picnic. He placed his coat on the ground in front of him. Then he looked up at the women. "Then I'll sit here too," he said. "If you're going to freeze, I'll freeze with you." The platform went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The women stared at this American soldier sitting in the snow, already turning red from cold, refusing to put his coat back on. His sergeant started forward. "Sullivan, what the hell are you doing? Get up!" Sullivan raised a hand. "No, sir. If they won't take the blankets, I won't take my coat. Fair is fair." Minutes passed. Sullivan's lips began to turn purple. His hands shook violently. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. But he did not move. He sat there looking at nothing, his eyes distant, his body slowly surrendering to the cold. Greta watched with a feeling like drowning. This was not in the script. The Americans were supposed to laugh at their suffering. They were supposed to force the blankets on them to prove dominance. They were supposed to drag the women inside by their hair. They were not supposed to sit in the snow and offer to freeze alongside them. She realized with shock that Sullivan was not performing. He was not trying to shame them. He genuinely intended to sit there until they accepted the blankets or until he froze to death. "You are insane," Maria whispered. Sullivan looked up at her, and he smiled. It was a sad smile, tired, old beyond his years. "Maybe," he said, "but you're not the enemy anymore. The war is over, and I'm not going to let you freeze just because you're scared." Scared, not defiant, not brave, scared. The word hit Greta like a slap, and it was true. She looked around at the other women. They were all shaking, all blue-lipped, all terrified. And this American soldier saw through it all. Another minute passed. Sullivan's sergeant was arguing with an officer now, gesturing at Sullivan, clearly worried. Snow was piling on Sullivan's shoulders. His breathing had become dangerously shallow. Finally, Greta could not stand it anymore. She stepped forward, picked up one of the rejected blankets from the snow, wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool was thick, heavy, warm. "There," she said, her voice breaking. "I took the blanket. Now put on your coat before you die, you stupid American." Sullivan looked at the other women. One by one, slowly, they began picking up blankets. Some cried as they did it. Others looked away in shame. But they took the blankets, every single one. Only then did Sullivan stand. His legs barely held him. He was shaking so hard his whole body rattled. Another soldier rushed forward with his coat. Sullivan looked at the women. "Welcome to Camp Stark," he said quietly. "You're safe now." The words should have sounded absurd, but they did not, because something had shifted, something had cracked, and what came next would crack it even further. They were led through gates crowned with barbed wire. The wooden building smelled of pine and disinfectant. Inside, radiators clanked and hissed along the walls. The sudden warmth after hours of freezing made Greta dizzy. Several women stumbled. American soldiers caught them before they hit the floor. A female officer appeared. She was in her 30s. Crisp uniform, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She spoke German with a heavy American accent, but the words were clear. "My name is Lieutenant Hartman. I know you are frightened. I know you have been told terrible things about what will happen here." The women said nothing. They stood in a tight cluster, blankets wrapped around them like armor. "You are prisoners of war," Hartman continued, "but you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Shelter, food, medical care, work appropriate to your abilities. You will not be harmed. You will not be degraded. You have my word." No one believed her. Words were cheap. The Reich had made many promises too. "First, we need to process you. That means recording your names, ranks, and units. Then medical screening and delousing. After that, you will be assigned barracks, given clean clothes, and fed a hot meal." Delousing. The word sent ice through Greta's veins. That meant showers. That meant undressing. That meant exactly what the SS officer had warned about. Maria grabbed Greta's arm. Her fingers dug in hard. "This is where it happens," she whispered. "This is where they photograph us, where they—" She could not finish. The women were led in groups of 10 into a tiled room. But there were no cameras. No leering soldiers, only female American medics in white uniforms. They checked for lice, for skin diseases, for injuries. They worked quickly and professionally. They did not mock. They did not stare. Then came the showers. The shower room was large and white. Dozens of nozzles lined the walls. Greta stood frozen, still wearing her filthy uniform. She stared at the showerheads with absolute certainty that this was a trick. Gas would come out instead of water. This was how it would end. She had heard whispers about the camps in Poland, about rooms that looked like showers but breathed poison, about bodies stacked in ovens. She had not believed those stories then, but standing in this white room, she believed them now. "You can keep your undergarments on if you prefer," a medic said in German, "but you need to wash. Trust me, you will feel better." Slowly, the women began to undress. Greta removed her jacket, her skirt, her torn stockings. She kept her undergarments on and stepped under a shower head. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. She turned it. Water came out. Hot water, real water, clean water that steamed and ran clear, not gas. Greta stood under the stream and felt months of grime and fear wash away. Around her, women were crying. Some laughed. Some stood silent with faces tilted up and eyes closed. According to camp records, this was the first hot shower any of them had experienced in over 14 months. Then came the soap. Not the grey, gritty bars they had used in Germany. Those smelled like lye and left skin raw. This soap was white and smooth. It lathered into thick foam, and it smelled like lavender. Greta held the bar in her hands and stared at it like it was made of gold. "They give us soap," Maria said through tears. "Real soap." "Why do they give us soap?" Greta had no answer. After the showers, medics handed them towels, clean, white, soft towels that smelled like sunshine. Then came clothes. American work clothes, canvas pants, cotton shirts, wool sweaters, thick socks, boots that actually fit. Greta looked at herself in a mirror on the wall. She did not recognize the woman staring back. Clean, warm, no longer wearing the uniform of a defeated army. Then came the food. They were led to a dining hall, long wooden building, tables and benches in neat rows. The smell hit them first. Real food, not the watery cabbage soup they had survived on, not the sawdust bread that scratched their throats. This smelled like meat, like vegetables, like bread fresh from an oven. The women stood frozen, staring. American soldiers ate at some tables. They looked up as the women entered. A few nodded, most returned to their meals. No one jeered, no one shouted. It was almost disappointingly normal. Greta picked up a metal tray. American cooks in white aprons placed food on it. Mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, a thick slice of meatloaf, a roll with real butter, a cup of coffee, a red apple without bruises. She sat down and stared at her tray. There was more food here than she had eaten in a week during the final months in Hamburg. "Is it poisoned?" whispered Helga, a typist from Munich. "If they wanted to poison us, they would not waste real food," Maria said. Greta picked up the roll, warm in her hand. She tore off a piece and put it in her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Butter, salt, wheat, yeast. Tears ran down her face as she chewed. Around her, women ate and cried. One woman took a bite of meatloaf and immediately vomited. Her stomach, shrunken from months of starvation, could not handle real food. A medic appeared instantly with crackers and water. "My brother is starving in Cologne," Maria said suddenly. Her voice was flat, empty. "My mother is eating rats in a cellar, and I am here eating meatloaf." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Every woman at that table knew it was true. They were prisoners, eating better than their families, better than their countrymen, better than the victors back home in the ruins of Germany. This was not propaganda. This was reality. And reality, they were learning, was far more complicated than anything the Reich had prepared them for. The days developed a rhythm. Wake at 6 to the sound of a bell. Wash at communal sinks with running water. Breakfast in the dining hall. Oatmeal with brown sugar. Toast with jam. Coffee, sometimes eggs. Then work assignments. The Geneva Convention prohibited using prisoners for military purposes, so the women were assigned to tasks like laundry, kitchen duty, sewing, and maintenance. The work was not hard. Nothing like the backbreaking labor they had heard about in Soviet camps. Greta was sent to the sewing room. She repaired uniforms and bedding. The work was familiar. She had been a seamstress before the war. The sewing room was warm and well lit. They had real thread, real needles, real fabric. An American sergeant named Miller supervised, but mostly he read paperback novels and drank coffee. Sometimes he brought them cookies from the mess hall. "You work hard," he said one day, watching Greta repair a torn jacket. "You don't have to work that hard, you know. You're prisoners. We're not going to punish you if you slow down." Greta did not know how to respond. In Germany, slowing down meant punishment, less food, beatings, worse assignments. But here, Sergeant Miller seemed embarrassed to have them working at all. After work came free time. The women could walk around the compound within certain boundaries. There was a canteen where they could buy items using vouchers they earned from work. Greta stood in the canteen one afternoon, staring at the shelves. Hershey bars, packs of Lucky Strike cigarettes, bottles of Coca-Cola, magazines, playing cards, things she had not seen since before the war, things Germany had stopped producing years ago. "You can have 2 items per week," the clerk said. A young private who looked bored. "What do you want?" Greta pointed at a chocolate bar. She turned it over in her hands. Hershey's milk chocolate, made in Hershey, Pennsylvania. She thought about Pennsylvania, a place she had never seen, a place that made chocolate while Germany made war. That night she sat on her bunk and broke off a piece. It melted on her tongue, sweet and rich and utterly foreign. Around her, women savored their chocolate in small, careful bites. Some wrapped pieces in paper to save for later. Some ate the entire bar at once, unable to stop. "Do you remember the chocolate we had before the war?" asked Helga. "Real German chocolate from Berlin. My father would bring it home on special occasions." "I have not had any chocolate since 1942, Greta said. "We were told all the sugar was needed for the war effort, and yet the Americans have enough sugar to make chocolate for their soldiers," Maria said quietly. "Enough to give it to their prisoners, too." The barracks had real beds, mattresses stuffed with straw, 2 wool blankets per person, a pillow, a footlocker, a pot-belly stove that kept the room warm through the New Hampshire winter. Maria climbed onto her bunk. They even gave us pillows. I have not had a pillow since 1943, but the comfort brought no peace. Letters arrived from Germany every few weeks. They came through the Red Cross, and they were all the same: hunger, cold, destruction, families living in rubble, children with rickets and scurvy, cities without water or electricity. According to Red Cross reports, the average daily calorie intake in occupied Germany had fallen to 1,200 calories per day. In some cities, it was below 1,000. Starvation rations. At Camp Stark, the women received approximately 2,800 calories per day. They ate 3 full meals while their families ate potato peels. Maria's letter arrived in April. Greta sat with her while she read it. She watched Maria's face grow paler with each line. When she finished, Maria folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. "My little brother died," Maria said flatly. "Pneumonia. They had no medicine, no coal to heat the apartment. He was 8 years old." She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, American soldiers were playing baseball in the afternoon sun. "He died while I was eating bacon and eggs for breakfast," Maria said. "While I was warm, while I was safe. He was freezing to death in Berlin, and I was here complaining that the coffee was not hot enough." "That is not your fault," Greta said. "Is it not?" Maria turned to face her, tears streaming down her face. "We worked for the regime that destroyed our country. We typed their letters, operated their equipment, supported their war machine. And when it all collapsed, we were captured by the enemy and treated better than our own people. How is that not our fault?" The question had no answer. Some women stopped eating. They pushed their trays away, said they did not deserve it. American medics force-fed them until they started eating again. Even the refusal of food was not permitted. The Americans insisted on keeping them alive and healthy. The guilt was constant, a weight that pressed down on all of them. Greta gained 20 pounds in 3 months. Her hollow cheeks filled out, her skin glowed with health. Her hair, which had been falling out from malnutrition, grew thick and shiny. She looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized herself. She looked healthy. She looked alive, and it filled her with shame. "Look at us," Maria said bitterly. "We grow fat while Germany starves. The enemy feeds us better than our own leaders ever did." It was true, and everyone knew it. In the final years of the war, German rations had been cut again and again. People survived on bread made from sawdust and chestnuts, on watery soup with a few floating vegetables, on hope and propaganda. The women in Camp Stark ate better as prisoners than they had as free citizens of the Reich. The question haunted them all. Why? Why did the Americans treat them so well? The answer, when it came, would be even more devastating than the question. The Americans allowed the women to listen to the radio in the evenings. The news that came through was devastating. Germany had surrendered completely. Hitler was dead by his own hand in a Berlin bunker. The cities were in ruins. Millions were displaced, homeless, starving, and the concentration camps were being revealed. The full extent of the horror was beyond comprehension. In the barracks at night, the women argued. "It is Allied propaganda," insisted Helga. She had been a devoted party member. "They're exaggerating to justify what they did to our cities. The photographs are real," Maria shot back. The American soldiers who liberated the camps were there. They saw it. Sullivan saw it. Sullivan. Greta found him one evening standing guard at the perimeter. Her English had improved. The camp offered evening classes, and many women attended. "May I ask you something?" she said. Sullivan stopped. Cigarette in his hand. "Sure. Did you really see the camps?" Sullivan's face went distant. "Yeah, Buchenwald. April 11th. We liberated it." The name hung between them like smoke. Buchenwald. The concentration camp near Weimar. According to military reports, American forces found over 21,000 prisoners still alive. Most were barely alive, living skeletons, mountains of corpses, crematoria still warm. "What was it like?" Greta asked quietly. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. "The smell hit us first. Death and burning. Then we saw them. Prisoners who looked like they were already dead but still walking. Children with arms like sticks. Mass graves. Ovens." He looked at Greta. His eyes were haunted. "Did you know about the camps?" he asked. "No," Greta said. "Then more honestly, I heard rumors. But I did not believe them. I thought they were lies. Enemy propaganda." "A lot of Germans say that," Sullivan said. "Not angry, just tired. I don't know if I believe them. But the camps were real. The people in them were real. And they're dead now." He walked away, leaving Greta standing alone with the weight of his words crushing down on her shoulders. The Americans showed films in the camp theater on Saturday nights. Hollywood movies. The women went reluctantly at first, expecting propaganda. But the films were not about the war. They were about romance, adventure, dancing, normal life. The first film Greta saw was a musical called Meet Me in St. Louis. She sat in the darkened theater surrounded by other German women and a scattering of American soldiers. The film showed an American family preparing for the 1904 World's Fair. There was singing, dancing, romance, comedy. The family worried about moving to New York. The daughters fell in love. The mother prepared elaborate dinners. It was so normal, so peaceful, so far from anything Greta had known for 6 years that it felt like watching life on another planet. When the lights came up, tears streamed down her face. She was not alone. All around her, German women cried silently. "Why are we crying?" Helga whispered. It was just a silly musical. But Greta understood. They were crying because the film showed them what normal life looked like. A life where the biggest worry was moving to another city, where families gathered for dinner and sang songs, where children played in yards and mothers baked cakes, all the things Germany had sacrificed for total war. "They have so much," Maria whispered, "and we have nothing. We destroyed ourselves while they built this." The American soldiers were another puzzle. Sergeant Davis supervised the laundry detail. He was a black soldier from Mississippi. Some of the German women had never met a black person before. Reich propaganda had taught them that black people were inferior, subhuman. But Sergeant Davis was patient and kind. He treated them with more respect than many German officers had shown. One day, Helga asked him directly, Why are you nice to us? We were told your people were treated badly in America, that you were oppressed." Davis smiled. It was a complicated smile. "That's true," he said. "America isn't perfect. We have our own problems with racism and injustice. But you know what the difference is? We can talk about it. We can fight to change it. Your country tried to make superiority into a science, into a law. And look where it got you. Helga had no response. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Everything the Reich had taught them was being proven false. The Americans were not monsters. Black soldiers were not inferior. The enemy treated them with dignity, while their own leaders had left them to starve. Greta started keeping a diary. Paper and pencils were available in the canteen. She wrote, "If we were lied to about the camps, what else were we lied to about? Were the Americans really monsters? No, they feed us. They clothe us. They treat us with more dignity than our own government ever did. I do not know what to believe anymore. The foundation has cracked and I am falling through." In the barracks one night, Helga spoke. Her voice was hollow. "Then we were betrayed. We were lied to by our own leaders. Everything we believed, everything we fought for, it was all a lie. The admission hung in the air. Once spoken, it could not be taken back." The women sat in silence, the weight of understanding settling over them like snow. They had served a regime that destroyed their country. They had believed in a cause that was rotten at its core. And the proof surrounded them every day, in the soap, in the food, in the kindness of enemies who should have been monsters. This was not propaganda. This was truth, and truth cut deeper than any blade. The announcement came in August 1945. Germany had been divided among the Allied powers. Prisoners would be repatriated in stages, sent back to whatever zone their hometowns fell under. For most women in Camp Stark, that meant the American or British zones. The news should have brought joy. They were going home. Instead, the barracks filled with dread. "I am afraid," Maria admitted. "I am afraid to leave." Other women nodded. It was shameful to admit, but true. Here they were safe, fed, warm, cared for. In Germany, they would return to ruins, starvation, judgment, and the impossible task of rebuilding a shattered nation. Greta wrote in her diary, "I fear going back more than I feared coming here. What kind of person does that make me?" The day of departure arrived in September. The women packed their few belongings into bags provided by the Americans. They were given traveling clothes, food for the journey, a small amount of money. Some cried, others were silent. Private Sullivan stood at the gates as they prepared to board the buses. Greta found him. She did not know what to say. "Thank you," she finally managed. "For the blanket, for the soap, for everything." Sullivan smiled that same sad smile from the day in the snow. "You take care of yourself, Greta. And when you get home, tell people the truth about what happened here. Tell them we're not all monsters." "I will," Greta promised, "even if they do not believe me." Hamburg in September 1945 was a nightmare. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. People lived in cellars and bombed-out buildings. Children with hollow eyes begged in the streets. The smell of death and decay hung over everything. The first thing that struck Greta was the silence, not true silence. There were sounds of reconstruction, hammers, saws, voices, but the sounds of a living city were gone. No traffic, no music from cafes, no church bells, only the hollow echo of survival. She walked through streets she barely recognized. The bakery, where her mother had bought bread every morning, was a pile of bricks. The school she attended as a child was a burned shell. The park where she played was now a cemetery, hundreds of wooden crosses marking hurried graves. People stared at her as she passed. She was too healthy, too clean, too well-fed. Her American-made clothes marked her as someone who had been elsewhere, who had not shared in the suffering. One old woman spat at her feet. Greta found her mother living in the basement of what had once been their apartment building. The building itself was a burned shell, but the basement was intact. Her mother had aged 20 years in 18 months. She was skeletal, her face all sharp angles and loose skin. Her hands trembled constantly. "Greta," her mother whispered, and collapsed into her arms, sobbing. That night, eating thin soup made from turnips, Greta tried to explain where she had been. Her mother listened in silence. "You were in an American prison camp," her mother said slowly. "And they fed you, gave you clean clothes, let you keep diaries." "Yes. And you look," her mother's voice broke. "You look healthy. You have gained weight. Your skin is clear. You look like you have been to a spa, not a prison." The words were not an accusation, but they felt like one. Greta had been in captivity, eating 3 meals a day, while her mother had been free, starving in a ruined city. "I am sorry," Greta said. "I know it is not fair." Her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took Greta's hand. "No, I am glad. I am glad you were somewhere safe. I am glad the Americans treated you well. It means there is still some humanity left in this world." 23 years later, in 1968, Greta sat in her small apartment in Munich. Her daughter Anna was studying history at the university. She had asked to hear about the war, about the camps. "So the Americans were kind to you?" Anna asked. "Yes," Greta said, though it took me a long time to understand why. Why did they do it? Greta thought about Private Sullivan sitting in the snow, his lips turning purple, refusing to put on his coat until the women accepted mercy. She thought about the soap, the food, the beds, the dignity, because they understood something we did not, Greta said. They understood that cruelty breeds more cruelty, but kindness can break a cycle. They could have punished us. It would have been justified. But instead, they chose mercy. And that mercy changed us in ways that punishment never could have. "Do you still have the diary?" Anna asked. Greta nodded. She pulled out a worn notebook from a drawer, opened to a page from June 1945, showed it to her daughter. Anna read her mother's handwriting aloud. "The Americans defeated us with soap. It sounds absurd, but it is true. They could have destroyed us with hatred, but they chose kindness instead. And kindness is harder to carry than cruelty. Cruelty confirms your beliefs. Kindness forces you to change them." Greta reached into the same drawer and pulled out something else. A small, worn bar of lavender soap, barely larger than a coin now, saved for 23 years. "This is from Camp Stark," Greta said quietly, "from that first day. I kept it all these years as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Anna asked. "That even in the darkest of wars, humanity can survive. That the enemy I feared turned out to be more human than the leaders I trusted. That mercy is stronger than vengeance, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a bomb, but a bar of soap offered to someone who expects to die." Anna held the soap in her hands, this small, simple object that had changed her mother's life. "What did you learn at Camp Stark?" she asked. Greta was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "I learned that we had been lied to about everything, that the Americans were not monsters, that kindness is not weakness, that treating people with dignity is not surrender. And I learned that the Reich destroyed us not just with bombs, but with lies. Lies that made us afraid of mercy. Lies that made us throw blankets in the snow. Lies that nearly made us freeze to death rather than accept help from good people." She took the soap back from her daughter and held it. "This soap saved my life. Not just my body, my soul. It reminded me that I was human, that humanity still existed. And that is a lesson I will never forget." The 127 German women who arrived at Camp Stark in February 1945 came expecting monsters and found men. They came prepared for degradation and received dignity. They came ready to die and were given life. Private James Sullivan's 60 seconds in the snow broke their resistance, but it was the months that followed that broke their certainty. Every meal, every bar of soap, every blanket, every act of ordinary human decency chipped away at the lies they had been told. They returned to Germany carrying more than just memories. They carried proof that the enemy had been more merciful than their own leaders, that abundance was stronger than scarcity, that kindness could defeat hatred more completely than any weapon. The soap stayed with them. Some kept actual bars, like Greta, others carried it in memory, but all of them carried the lesson. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its bombs or its tanks. It was its humanity, the simple choice to treat defeated enemies not with cruelty, but with the dignity that all humans deserve. That choice echoed through generations, through daughters who asked questions, through stories passed down, through the understanding that mercy is not weakness, it is the hardest and most powerful form of strength. They had screamed, "Let us die in the cold." Instead, one soldier sat down in the snow and refused to let them, and that made all the difference.